Good morning and welcome to this episode of Random Guy number 6. Today we're going to be refreshing the look of a living room / dining room area. We're going to do new paint, new flooring, new baseboard trim, and just giving this thing an overall overhaul. So let's get to it. I like to start from the top down when doing these projects, and this big crack across the entire ceiling needs to be fixed. So the first thing I need to do is rip this thing out and patch it and try and make it look pretty again. Now you can see here underneath this layer of drywall mud is more paper tape. So this has been repaired more than once. Knowing what we know, obviously paper tape is not gonna fix the problem. So I'm gonna try some fiber tape, and hopefully that will keep this crack from propagating and having this big ugly crack in the middle of the living room dining area. Next, we're gonna slap a coat of all-purpose joint compound on there and get this thing starting to look smooth again. While that's drying, I'm gonna go ahead and prep the rest of the ceiling. There's crown molding here, so there's little gaps and cracks. Those all need to be filled with caulk. I'm gonna pull the fan blades off to get them out of the way for when I'm rolling, and take the vent covers off and make sure that everything is kind of out of the way and easy to roll. So let's get to it.
How you play the game with the people that writing the rules? Ain't the fame that I'm after when paying the dues. I've been through the pain that's reflected in the attitude. Might be winning now, but the thing is that I had to lose. So go and tell me what you really wanna do. And lonely at the top, cause there ain't a lot of room. Ain't no other option, it's all I ever knew. So I'ma get it poppin', you know how I'ma do. I've been down through the blood and the sweat. Guarantee you can know I'm a threat. I've been down through the blood and the sweat, and I ain't close to being done yet, I'm going all in. Yeah, I'm going all in. And I ain't close to being done yet, I'm going all in. Yeah. They know I'm going all in. Through the blood and the sweat, y'all know we ain't close to being done yet, I'm going all in. I've been down from the jump. Ain't no love lost, we just really doing us. Go and take your seat, looking silly getting up. Y'all know what it is, let me tell them what it was. It was 24/7 on the grind, one thing at a time. Hard to understand, kind of person, got the state of mind. We was making moves every day, getting things in line.
Everything is now sanded, so it's time to get on to the texturing. So I have this handy dandy little spot texturing tool. It works pretty fantastic for small jobs like this. Obviously, I wouldn't do a whole house with it, otherwise I'd be doing it for several weeks. But for small little areas like what I have here, this thing will work fantastic. Now, if you don't want to buy a full bag of texture, you can just basically take the mud that you have and put a little bit, in a container and water it down a little bit. Once you get it watered down, you can use it just like texture. You see, I just put just a little bit of water in there, and now I'm gonna mix it up. Because you don't want it to be too watery, but you want it to be watery enough where it will actually spray out of this tiny little hopper. I'd say that's pretty close. Close to a pancake batter. And we just take our machine, fill it up. And I'll go show you how to use it. Literally all you have to do is just start pumping it, and on the side here there's actually a little setting for how thick you want the texture. Now, depending on your texture will depend on where you need to set it. You can do a test spot on a piece of cardboard or something like that, but I'll just test it on the ceiling and Now basically the one thing you don't want to do is put it on super heavy right away, because you know, you can put it on in layers and just kind of keep adding a little bit, adding a little bit, adding a little bit until it all looks uniform, which is just the better way to do it, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And I am not great at texturing, but I'm good enough, so we'll call that good enough. So you can kind of see what it looks like now with the texture on the ceiling. And you're gonna have areas that obviously aren't perfect, so we can add a little bit more. And like these high spots, we can just take a little sandpaper, knock them down a little bit. Very, very lightly. That'll help it blend a little bit better. Now that all the texturing and prep work is done, it's time to move on to the next step. So everywhere where I put on texture and sanded on the walls, we're gonna need to coat that with primer, and then after that, then we can start painting. I almost forgot one thing, and that would be my painting clothes. So you're gonna say, but your other clothes were really dirty. They were, but they were dirty with drywall mud, which washes out very easily. Paint does not. So let's get to it. So now that the primer is all dry, it's finally time to paint. The first thing you're going to need is a nice microfiber brush. The thickness of the brush will depend on the thickness of your texture. If you have a thicker texture, you're going to need a thicker brush. Most of them you can get away with a 1/2 inch, 5/8, 9/16. They're all pretty much the same thing. But the first thing you're going to want to do is tape it. And when you do that, that'll get all of the little fuzzies and stuff out of your roller, just to make sure you don't apply the dirt or fuzzies to the wall. The next thing you're gonna need is a nice thick brush, something with an angle. You don't need to go with the most expensive brush, but probably one step down should be good enough. And then your paint. Now I'm going with a Clark & Kensington semi-gloss paint for the ceiling and for all the trim, and had it pre-mixed, so I don't even have to mix it. So basically what I wanna do here is dump a bunch out into this rolling bucket I have, and just leave enough so I can cut. So I'll probably about 3/4 of it I'll dump out. Leave about that much in there. Now let's go do some cutting. Now obviously I pretty much do everything alone, so if you're painting by yourself, you're gonna wanna basically cut the ceiling and then fan this edge out really lightly. So when you come back and roll, it's probably gonna be dry and you won't have like this really nasty looking edge. Now, obviously I'm gonna go ahead and paint the crown molding while I'm here. So I'm gonna put it on really heavy. And I can basically just slop it on the bottom here too, because we are painting the wall. Just make sure we don't leave any brush marks or big globs underneath. And then just try and smooth it out. Now that the ceiling is all painted and looking pretty, it's time to start painting the walls. If you're painting solo like I normally do, the first thing you want to do is cut your corners, cut your tops, cut your bottoms, and then roll out each wall. The best way that I've found to cut a ceiling line in is to use the natural light of the room. And as you can see this really clear shadow. You want to basically tilt your brush to the side, push it up in there, and then follow that shadow. And as long as you follow the shadow, you'll always have a straight line. If you have little spots that you missed, you can just, put your brush back up in there a little bit and kind of touch that up. And we're good to go. Well, it's as easy as that. I'm gonna finish cutting this wall out, roll it out, and then do the whole rest of the room.
I've got two souls, 'cause I'm way gone, trying to find my way back home. Count my bones as in desert crumbs spoon. I'm gonna turn all of my stones.
Rock bottom make the man and some pressure make a gemstone. Trying to put $1 to my name like Creflo. Not your boy, late to the game. It's in the blood flow. And I'm from the south. It's thick skin and tough bone. Big attitude through big lips with gusto. Trust no kings, that's why they tried to crush souls. But it's IGBO. When the dust blow, this old head be standing there. No silver, just gold. Crack no books on the hustle. I was born to grind. Yo, scared of your potential. I'm adorned with mine. 30 times around the sun, man. Of course I shine. My legacy will not dwarf with time. And in my daughter's eyes, it's basic. I must not say quit. Every day sees a present like a Rob St. Nick. Walk a fine line between tenacious and patient. I can't slip. I'm fighting clocks and they can't win.
I've got two souls, 'cause I'm way grown, trying to find my way back home. Count my bones as in desert crumbs flow. I'm gonna turn all of my stones. I've got bruised souls, 'cause I'm way grown, trying to find my way back home. Who that soldier in the mirror? Oh, oh.
Well, now I've gotten all the painting done. Now I can actually move on to the electrical. I want to change out all of the outlets and switches that are old because they just need some updating. Now you're going to want to make sure your floor is super clean, so you're going to want to go around, scrape up any little imperfections and stuff that you have in it. If there's spots that are unlevel, you're going to want to level those. Now we can kind of combat that with like a foam underlayment if there's real minor imperfections, but if you have big dips and spots like that, you're going to have to do some concrete leveler. Now the brand of the flooring that I'm installing is called Lifeproof, and they also have their own specific underlayment that you can put down for concrete that is Lifeproof brand. Now, if you have a brand of flooring that you're laying, I would suggest going with whatever the manufacturer suggests for your underlayment. If you need it, you might not need it if you're on wood, because they do have their own pads, but because I'm doing this on concrete, I want to put some underlayment down, not just a vapor barrier. I want a little bit of squishiness, kind of softens up the floor a little bit, gives a little bit of sound deadening, not much, but every little bit helps. So that's what I'm going to start next. I'm going to grab some underlayment, and basically all I need to do is cut it, lay it out, and tape the seams. So let's get to it. when you're laying the first row, you want to make sure that you put these spacers in there. Now this is going to give you a little bit of a gap because it is a floating floor and it does tend to move around, swell, all that kind of stuff. And the trim that you add on to the wall at the bottom here will cover that space. The next thing we want to look at is how to end your first piece. This edge here is actually the one that's going to click into here. Make sure that that is the edge that clicks into there. And then you slide it up to the wall. You want to give yourself, you know, that 1/4 inch gap. And then all you really need to do is mark here. And that's where you want your cut. I cut mine with a chop saw with a fine blade on it to get a nice clean edge. And then we should just be able to pop this bad boy right in here. Pop our last couple spacers in. And we can start on the next row. Now the excess piece that I have cut off from the other end, I'm just going to use that one to start the next row because they kind of want a random seam pattern. If you're doing like more of a structured seam pattern, then you know you would do something different. But in this instance, we're doing a random one. So we just start with this. Get the next row kind of started here. And then you'll see this tiny little seam here, so we need to actually lock this thing together. And that's what these spacers are for, is so you can knock this and it stays tight. And as soon as your seam is gone, you can move on to the next one. Now in a normal house, the trim for around the door sticks out, or it's kind of even here, and we usually just cut and slide this underneath. But this is actually a brick wall, and this is a metal piece of trim. So what we need to do is we actually need to cut this contour in here so we can slide it, and it's as tight as we can get it kind of in here, and then we can fill in that gap. And in order to do that, we'll just use one of these. Now that I have my piece all cut, I can just kind of get it as generally close as I can. Tap her this way, and tap her in place. Now this part will be covered with trim, and I'll just have this tiny little gap here, and I'll put some caulk in it to hide that. Now that all the flooring is installed, it's time to put on some base trim. Now, these are all brick walls, so it's not like I can just nail it to the wall. It's not gonna work. So I'm actually gonna have to use construction adhesive. But the first thing we need to do is measure this up. We're gonna paint it before we install it and then do any touch-ups we need to do when it's up. So let's get started. We're gonna measure the whole length of the wall, all the way from the corner all the way to the end. Now the first thing we wanna do is set our saw to a 45-degree angle. This will be set because we need to do the inside corners so that they fit all nice and pretty like. And we'll cut that inside corner first. Now that we got the inside corner cut, we will flip it, measure it, and then cut the outside corner the opposite way. And now we can go see if it fits. All right, let's see if this fits good. And that looks good. Now, you don't have to worry too much if your cuts are a little off, because we can fix any of the imperfections or problems with caulk. So let's get the rest of this room cut out and it's kind of set in place so we know it all fits, and we'll move on to the next step. Now that everything's been cut to fit, it's time to put a little bit of paint on these things, and then we can go install them. Now that everything's painted, it's time to actually get to installing this. So the first thing we need to do is coat the back of these with some construction adhesive and attach them to the wall. So it's pretty much that simple. So apply a fairly generous amount in a zigzag pattern. And simply get it into position and press it to the wall.
I'm making plays, y'all know where to find me, you be looking center stage 24/7, we ain't never taking breaks. Got a lot to learn, think you better know the game. Yeah, y'all don't like the match, finally got the belt, now I think I'll give it back. At 24/7 grind, put me on the map. I think you probably should try to study how I move, that's a fact. Yeah, y'all don't like the match, I got the belt and I ain't gon' give it back. Yeah, y'all like the match, I got the belt and I ain't gon' give it back. Yeah, I'm making play. And I can do this all day, you know I've been making plays.
Now we need to install this vinyl T-molding as a transition between the new vinyl floor and the existing tile floor. First things first, we need to kind of clean up the concrete. Next, we'll take a measurement. Now I just cut this on the chop saw, and this front lip here is for if the flooring is uneven, so it can kind of sit a little bit differently. But we don't need this, so we're basically just going to snap this front edge off. Now that's going to be a little bit too low, I think, so we're going to have to use the little spacer to bring it up a little bit. Which is this white piece. It's going to be the exact same measurement of this one, so I'm going to go cut this one quick. All right, so now I got these cut. Set everything in here. Make sure everything is going to fit. Now we'll cut the actual T-molding itself, get that to fit, and then we'll glue everything in. Now the situation I'm dealing with is everything is concrete and metal, so I can't just cut those and slide this underneath like you normally would. So I'm just gonna cut this T-molding itself. So just mark this a little bit. Mark that one. Kind of get the gist of where we need to be here. Now we're ready for the adhesive. Now I got some weights to hold this thing down so it stays where it needs to stay. So the last thing I need to do is to install this threshold. Now I did have to modify it a little bit and cut the edges because this is all metal and concrete back here, so that just is what it is. Well, this living room and dining room project is now 100% complete, so I better move on to the next project. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.